Hey, this is Nate, and this is New Compass Collectibles. Today we're going to be looking at Heritage Weekly Auction sales data. And did we just find evidence of a flipper involved with Heritage auctions? There were some unusual sales in this week's data, and that led me to investigate, and the results may surprise you, so stay tuned. Okay, so these weekly Heritage auctions, I usually follow pretty closely, but I haven't reported on them on the channel, so this will be the first time reporting on the weekly sales data. I expect these videos to be pretty quick in the future, but this week I found some really interesting sales that made me want to dig in a little bit deeper. So I'm going to report on those later in the video, but first let's just go ahead and get into the overall summary statistics from this auction. In this auction, there were 1,133 total listings. Now, those aren't all individual comic books. There's hardcover books, there's other memorabilia, there's also group lots. And I don't include those in my analysis when I do my recap videos. So for the comics that I actually analyzed, there were 662 sales. That's about half of the total listings, but it represents a little over 80% of the revenue from the auction. So $514,000 in sales. As part of the analysis, I also looked to compare results to sales within the last 12 months. So of the 662 books, I was able to find comparisons for 268 of those auctions. And when I say comparisons, I mean a sale of the same book in the same grade within the last 12 months. So for those 268 comparisons, the average result in this auction was a 3% drop compared to the most recent sale. So slightly weaker than recent results, but not a significant drop-off. There were also approximately equal number of strong sales versus weak sales. So these are sales that had a 20% either increase or decrease compared to the most recent sale that I could find. Just a visual representation here of what was contained in this auction. I was actually surprised at how many Golden Age books are in the weekly auctions. If you're not familiar with the weekly auctions, Sunday is dedicated to Golden Age books, and then Monday and Tuesday would be silver, and then bronze and modern books. So Golden Age had 183 listings with an average of $528 per sale. Silver Age, there were 286 listings for an average of $312 per sale. As I mentioned, there were 268 listings in this auction that I could compare to a recent sale. And this is a visualization of all of those sales comparisons in one chart. So the dotted line represents if the sale in this auction was the same as the most recent sale. Dots above the dotted line were stronger sales in this auction, and dots below the dotted line were weaker sales in this auction. So the average result you can see was a minus 2.99%, or basically a 3% drop from recent sales. Most of these sales are clustered around the dotted line, some above, some below, but there were more below than above. So the sales in this auction were slightly weaker than sales over the past year, but not significant drop-offs. Now this chart shows the value of this auction catalog over time. So the sales in this week's auction are represented on the right, where you have that vertical dotted line. And you can see that the peak of the value was in April of 2022, where these books would have been worth $463,000. In this week's auction, those same books sold for $231,000. Now that doesn't represent the total value of the auction. These are just the subset of books that I was able to find historical values for. But it is a good representation of what the auction catalog's value has been over time and what the market has done over the past years. You can see that the results from this auction are at the lowest they've been since 2020. We've pretty much round-tripped back to mid-2020 levels. We've corrected significantly since the April 2022 peak, and it doesn't show signs of picking up yet. These auction values show that the market is still on the decline and in correction mode. But that's enough for the overall statistics in this auction. I want to look at some individual sales now and highlight some of the stronger and weaker sales in this auction. All right, let's start with some of the weaker sales in this auction. Here was an Avengers 91 in a 9.8 that sold for $690. The most recent sale before that was a $1,300 sale in April of 2024. So this one is a little bit nicer looking. It's white pages and the colors just seem a little bit brighter. This one is an older slab. It says white pages as well, but it doesn't look quite as vibrant. But still, it's almost half price, a year later. So really weak sale there for Avengers 91. Here we have a Ginger number 4. It sold for $492 in this auction in a 5.5. That same book sold for $900 just in October, so a few months ago. And looking at the history for this book, this was Ginger number 4, and again, we're looking at the 5.5 grade. It sold in 2021 for $1,380, then a $900 sale in 2024, and a $492 sale here in February of 2025. So big decreases there. This is a Golden Age book. It is a sought-after book, but you can see that even Golden Age books are not immune to price corrections in the market these days. Here we have a Detective Comics number 233 selling for $1,140 in a 4.0. Previous sale for that one was an October 7th sale of $1,560. Again, that was in 2024, so really just a few months ago, but a big drop off there for Detective Comics 233. That grade was a 4.0, so looking at the GPA sales history, this is another one that's on a pretty significant decline, from the peak in 2021, selling for $2,900 and now selling for $1,140. A weaker sale here for Tales of Suspense 58. This is a high-grade version of this book, a 9.2, selling for $1,260 in this auction. Previous sale was in January, just a month ago, for $1,620. Now, this is also a book that you see be pretty flat over time. Its peak was actually in 2011, selling for $2,125. 2011 was when when the Captain America movie first came out, so maybe saw a bit of an increase there with Captain America and Iron Man being in the Marvel universe, at the same time in 2011. We did just barely get over that peak in 2021 with a $2,280 sale, but now we are about 50% down from that 2021 peak. But overall, a pretty flat book in terms of price over more than a decade. All right, on the flip side, what were some of the stronger sales in this auction? Now, this is where I found some unusual sales activity that really led me down a rabbit hole to investigate further. So let's see what happened. First, this Amazing Spider-Man number 4, selling in a 3.5 for $1,260. This book has actually had some pretty strong sales lately. I'm not sure if there's a reason for it, but if you look at the sales history over 2024, it was selling pretty consistently in the $800, $900 range all of last summer. Towards the end of the year, we saw some higher sales, $1,100 in November, back down to $750 in December, but then $1,170 in December. That strength followed into 2025, so pretty much $1,000 plus all throughout the beginning of this year. So you can see the trend on this book has really turned upwards in the last few months. It's nice to see a book, especially in the Silver Age, turning the corner and seeing some uptrends. Now the next book here is where things start to get interesting. So we have a 5.5 Fantastic Comics number 12, sold for $1,140 in this auction. And looking at the most recent comparison, there was a $672 sale in September of 2024. Now notice this date, September 26, 2024, because we're going to see that as a theme here. Startling Comics number 1, this was a restored book. It sold for $900 in this auction, and pulling up the most recent comparison that I could find for that book was September 27th, 2024. That was a $600 sale at the time, and again, it sold for $900 in this auction. So a 50% increase in just a few months. The next book that we're going to look here is Prize Comics number 6, selling for $1,620. And the most recent sale that I could find for that book, September 27th, 2024, sold for $1,100. And then again, $1,600 in this auction. So $500 increase in just a few months. So 3 books that all had a sale in September of 2024 and then were resold again here in 2025. And if we go back and look at the photos again, these are the same exact books. It's not just a similar book or the same grade of that book. It's the exact same slab, the same serial number, the same grading company. So does that mean there was a flipper who was interested in books in that September time period, bought a bunch of books, and then resold them in this auction? I decided to try and dig into that and find out. Now, it turns out that these sales from the end of September came from one specific auction. If we go up to the top here, we can see the auction that these sales were made in. It was the September 26th and 27th Heroes of the Golden Age Comics Showcase Auction. At first, I thought maybe these listings were items that had been purchased in the September auction but didn't get paid for, or for whatever reason that transaction didn't get completed. So Heritage had to resell them in the February listings. I'm not sure that that's the case, though, because all of the data that I looked at, GPA Analysis has sales recorded for both the September sales and the February sales. And I'm pretty sure if the transaction doesn't go through on Heritage, GPA Analysis actually knows about that and doesn't record it as a completed sale in their sales history. But I'm not actually sure if that's how it works. If you know, please let me know in the comments. So with this information, I went and did a more in-depth analysis where I looked for any book in this weekly auction that also was sold in the September Heroes of the Golden Age auction. And I came up with a surprising number of books that were purchased in that September auction and are being resold here in this weekly auction in February. Now here is that complete list. There are 24 books that were purchased in the September auction, which only had 460 or so items, and they're all being resold here in February of 2025, just 5 months later. I pulled up a lot of these auction pages just to verify that they really were the same books. So I just wanted to double check that the September sales and the February sales were listings of the same exact book, the same serial number, everything. So I have these up side by side. This first one was a Black Hood number 15. In this case, the picture does look a little bit different. The sort of reflectivity of the CGC logo looks a little bit different in this picture than this one. Looks like a darker blue. The coloring on the comic book cover itself looks slightly different. So in this case, it looks like the images may have been rescanned to sell this book. But all the other cases, it looked like the same exact pictures were used. So here we have Blue Beetle number 25, September is on the right, and the February auction is on the left. So same exact book. Blue Beetle number 59. Again, obviously you can see the markings, the damage. This is the same exact book here, and it looks like the same picture too. Next book we have here is Catman Comics number 17. Again, the same book, the same pictures. So it looks like the same pictures were reused from one auction to the next. I don't know if that's typical. If somebody had purchased these items, taken delivery of them, and then resold them with Heritage, they would probably rescan the comics and then show new photos for the listings. If somebody bought all of these books in September and then said, Heritage, just hang on to these, I want you to relist them at a future weekly auction, maybe they would reuse the same photos. So it's really hard to know what the process was here that got, that one buyer to relist all of their items at auction 5 months later. Or maybe it wasn't even a buyer. Maybe it was Heritage themselves that needed to relist all of these items because they didn't sell. Or did they buy them internally? There's a theory around that Heritage has sort of a internal bidding or buying system that they might buy their own books. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but if you subscribe to that theory, maybe they bought them and then held on to them until February where they relisted them and sold them again. So was someone looking at that Golden Age auction as an opportunity to snag some deals and then flip them just 5 months later within the Heritage sales platform? I'm not sure. I don't really know what the history of this would be. If you have any guesses or explanations of why we would see such a large batch of books get bought and then resold just months later, or relisted by Heritage months later, please leave it in the comments, because I'm speculating that they were purchased by one individual and then resold a few months later just looking for a profit. But if you have another theory, let me know. So let's say it was one person trying to flip these books. How did the sales compare in September to February? Even if it wasn't someone intending to flip and it was just auctions that fell through for some reason and they were resold in February. This gives us an interesting opportunity to compare sales consistency from one auction to another, because we have 24 books, which is a pretty large sample size, that all sold in September, and then they sold again identical books in February. So what we're looking at here is all of the data from those 24 sales. In these columns, we have the sales data from September of 2024 in that Golden Age auction. And in these columns, we have the sales from February 2025 in this past weekly auction. And then these last two columns compare the differences between the February sales and the September sales. So let's just look at the averages here. In September 2024, these 24 books sold for a total of $15,925. In February 2025, this is 5 months later, those same books all sold for $16,951. So that's a $1,000 difference, $1,026 of higher sales in the weekly auction compared to the Golden Age showcase. It could be explained by any number of factors. In the weekly auction, you have a completely different audience than the showcase auctions, which are happening during the middle of the week. Not as many people know about them. We also have seasonality. Are people spending more on comics in February compared to September? I don't know. $1,000 might sound like a nice little profit for just buying some books and holding on to them for a few months, flipping them on the market. But don't forget that this is just a 6% increase in value. So this is the ratio of the February sales to the September sales, a 6.4% difference. And don't forget that this also doesn't account for Heritage's fees. So if you're buying or selling on Heritage, you're going to have taxes, there's buyer fees involved, there's seller fees involved. So there's no way you're profiting after you account for all of those expenses. That's what makes it so strange to see all of these books being resold a few months later. It doesn't really make sense for there to be a flipper involved in that short of a time frame, paying that high of a fee to Heritage. So I feel like there should be some other explanation, but I'm not sure what it would be. Maybe someone bought a lot of books and then decided they weren't interested in them anymore. Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they had some unforeseen personal circumstances come up and they can't afford to hang on to these books, so they have to resell them. I don't think it's someone flipping for profit. If they are, then it's probably not a very good business model. Now, the most interesting thing for me to look at with these sales is how wide of a range there is in performance from book to book in comparing the February and September sales. Now, on average, the February sales were higher by 6%. But if you look at the individual books, it is a very wide range of results. So I have these sorted from strongest to weakest sales when comparing the February data to the September data. Some of these books sold for 70%, 50%, 40% more in February than they did in September. But some of these books sold for 20%, 30% less than they did in September. So there's just not a lot of consistency auction to auction and book to book in terms of what you can expect an auction result to be on any given day. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me with this set of data. Now here you have 24 identical books selling in September and February, and you can see that some of them sold for much higher in one auction than the other. It really just depends in any given day what buyers are in the room and what people are interested in purchasing. Putting all 24 of these resales on the same chart, we can see how the sales compared between September and February. Now again, these are the same exact books selling just 5 months apart. So if they all sold for the exact same price in September and then again in February, the sales would all be on that diagonal dashed line. But you can see that the actual sales vary all over the place. The sales below the line were weaker in February and the sales above the line were stronger in February. And you have quite a mix of both stronger sales and weaker sales. So it's not like the whole auction was consistently stronger or weaker. So predicting auction results is difficult for exactly this reason. You can get a lot of variety in what should be a pretty identical, good comparison from one auction to another. The results just vary depending on who's in the room, who's interested in buying what types of books, what day of the week it is. Is it a specialized auction focusing on Golden Age, or is it a general auction like the weekly sales? This just shows that auction results are highly variable. There are a lot of factors that go into the auction results for any given sale, and you should be aware of that both as a buyer and as a seller. You shouldn't expect to know exactly how much your book is going to sell for if you're trying to sell a book. If you're a buyer, you need to be opportunistic when looking to make purchases. Now, sometimes there may be a book that you really want and you don't see it come up for auction very often, so you just have to jump on it when it's available and pay as much as you feel comfortable. But otherwise, if you're just looking to increase the value of your collection and build your collection out over time, then you really should be looking for deals when you look at auctions. You can see that in any given auction, there will be books that sell for a below market value. There will be books that sell for an above market value, and you should be looking out for the opportunities to get deals when you see them. Overall, a 6% difference is not that significant. So if you are selling this whole group of books, having a 6% margin of error in terms of consistency, auction to auction, is pretty good. But for any individual book, it could be 30% to 40% difference one auction to the next. These that I have pulled up on this screen are all the universal books, but there were also a bunch of restored books that were sold in the same manner. And those were kind of interesting as well, because if we go back to our spreadsheet, looking at the sales that were highest in February compared to the September counterparts, I have them sorted here by strength in February. So the February sales were higher than the September sales. And a lot of those were the restored books. So if you look here, this is the grade type. We have the restored Startling comics. We have a restored version of Speed Comics, Mystery Men, Pep Comics, Shield Wizard Comics. So a lot of the stronger sales from the weekly auction were actually restored books. I don't know what that says, but it was interesting to note. Maybe the weekly auction audience is more accepting of restored books, whereas the Golden Age Showcase maybe had people that were more picky and wanted, universal copies, so they didn't bid up the restored books as much. In any case, there was a lot of interesting ways to parse all of this sales data. I wouldn't expect to find something this unique or interesting every week, but I'm glad that I caught it this time and was able to dig into it. If there were any takeaways or analysis here that surprised you, let me know in the comments. If you have any theories as to why there would be so many books resold in such a short period of time from one auction to the next, I'd love to hear those in the comments. I have my own theories, but I really don't know what the actual answer is. If you like this kind of analysis, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so that you can see more of it. Share the channel with others so that we can get more conversation going in the comments. Thanks for sticking with me to the end here, and I'll see you again next time.